Hi, I'm Brent Stafford, and this is RegWatch by RegulatorWatch.com. There's one issue with the potential to unite anti-vaping campaigners with pro-vaping advocates and business owners in the Canadian vaping industry, and that issue is enforcement. Both sides in the battle over vaping want to stop teen use of nicotine vaping products, yet laws intended to prevent teen access, which are already on the books, often go unenforced. Joining us today to discuss the impacts of insufficient tobacco enforcement is Jason Flynn, Ontario-based owner of Vape Escapes, retail vape shops, owner of Refined Liquid Labs, and current board member at the Canadian Vaping Association. Jason, thanks for coming on the show.
Hey, Brent. Thanks for having me on. Great to see you.
And first off, tell us a bit about your shops and your customers.
Okay, well, we opened our stores back in 2015 with a small clientele. We've since grown pretty significantly. We have a very loyal customer base. They're pretty comfortable at this point with our regulations that we've had to deal with. We keep them very informed, but yeah, it's like any other vape shop, I suspect. We do our best to provide them with information and counsel them in the process of getting off of cigarettes and into vaping. We now have a couple of locations.
And that's excellent. And you've been around since the cowboy days.
Yeah, you could say that. It was definitely very early on. We were first making e-liquids, and that took off really well. And then, of course, when we opened our doors, we brought that into our stores as well. But yeah, there wasn't much in the way of regulations. However, when we did open, before we ever opened our doors, there was a sign that said you have to be 19 or older to come inside. So that was long before it was regulated.
Now, Ontario is the biggest market for vaping products in Canada, is it not?
I would think so. With 40% of the population of Canada being in Ontario, it stands to reason that there's going to be more shops as well.
Now, how big of a problem is teen vaping in your area?
It still exists. It's definitely better than it was. We very rarely have anybody underage attempt to come in anymore. That's almost never happens anymore. But once in a while, I do see youth vaping from time to time, but again, not nearly as often as it used to be.
So at retail, what are the main laws you have to follow to prevent youth use?
It was eventually regulated that you have to be 19 or older to come into the stores. It's actually, if they appear to be under the age of 25, we have to card them. And regardless of their age, if we card them, they have to produce ID before we can ever serve them. We cover our windows so that nobody can see in. But again, we did that long before it was actually regulated as the situation. So yeah, we use verification software, so we can, if identification looks a little sketchy, we can put it through our scanner and it'll tell if it's authentic. Our website is age gated, and again, there's also age verification software on there. So we're doing everything that we can to keep youth away from our stores. You can't come in with someone who's underage. Even if they're not purchasing, they're not to have access to the stores under any circumstances. So we're doing everything that we possibly can. And I mean, we're doing more than most age-restricted industries. If you're talking strip clubs or liquor stores or weed stores, they don't have, they're checking ID. They have, age restrictions as well. But I believe because there's so much scrutiny on our industry, we've kind of taken it to a different level.
Yeah. And do you think these efforts have played a role in lowering teen use?
I would think so. Yeah. I mean, we're never going to achieve net zero for underage vaping, but there's different ways of looking at it. I mean, most smokers started when they were underage, it's just the risky behavior that teenagers get into, and if they want it bad enough, they'll find a way. Now, I would say that most specialty vape stores, for fear of losing their designation, are enforcing this to the best of their ability, and so I would say that we are least likely to be the source of of them gaining access. Now, I can tell you, there is at one point we had this regular customer. Her name was Kim. We got to know her very well. She would come in and tell us all about her family, and it's just how it goes with our customers sometimes. And we got very close, but one day she walked into the store on her cell phone and she was talking to somebody, and she's, "Oh, that's great, honey. I'm so glad to hear that." And she was talking. I didn't know who she was talking to, and then she said, "Yeah, I'll see what they have." And then she asked me for a product. And I said, "Yeah, I got it." And then she eventually got off the phone, and she's like, "Oh, that was my daughter. She passed her exam. Remember that exam I was telling you about?" And I was like, "Oh, that's great." I said, "Your daughter's in high school, right?" And she said, "Yeah." I said, "What grade is she in?" She said, "Grade 8 or grade 11, I mean." And I said, "Well, then you can't buy for her." And she's like, "Well, I'm buying. I'm her mother. I can buy for her." I said, "You can't buy it here." And I said, "I know we've been friends for a long time, Kim, but you can't come back here anymore." And she hasn't been. She got very upset. She started crying and she left. But she came back a few months later and she said she understood and we were okay, but we couldn't serve her anymore.
So enforcement then, at least at your store, does cause some problems.
Yeah. We've definitely lost a lot of sales over the year by being sticky with the rules, but like I said, we opened our doors with 19 plus being the guideline, and we've stuck with that since the very beginning. And also, like I said, we get very few people attempting it anymore, and that's because it's people know that we're sticklers, and I'm okay with that. I don't want to play around with the rules. I don't see any need for someone who's underage to use these products. They were never our target market, and I think the same is true with most of our industry. People are passionate about this product, and they're also passionate about making sure that it ends up in the right hands. So, I'm okay with having that reputation. And so, when people are looking for 50 plus Nick, I'm probably the last place they're going to come looking. And when people are thinking that they're going to be 18 and get their hands on it, I'm not the guy they're going to come and see first. That's for sure.
Now we're going to get to the 50 Nick here in a second. Let me ask you this. I mean, when it comes to these restrictions, are they endless? I mean, is there a floor to what's happening here or a ceiling to what's happening, or is it just seems that they keep getting piled on?
The restrictions are pretty endless. I mean, like you said, once it was the Wild West and there was no rules, but once the rules started coming, they just kept on coming. And every time we reach a point where they drop the regulations, we've adjusted to them, there's another looming threat of some other regulation that's coming down the line. So it does get very frustrating. Actually, a prime example, so I mentioned that we started our juice line before we ever opened, so I think back in 2014. And it had a pretty decent following. It did pretty well. And then naturally, when we opened the stores, we put it on our shelves. We bottled it and we created a label and a logo and everything for it and made it all professional looking. And we didn't tell our customers, certainly not most of them anyways, that it was our product because we wanted to see how it held up on its own. And it remained probably one of our top sellers up until not that long ago. And that being said, I usually carry somewhere between 200 and 300 different flavors at a time, and it did pretty well. And then the regulations started coming in, and now I'm probably not going to get these in the right order, but when we created our label, we put the poison symbol on it, and we put allergy warnings on it, and the keep out of reach of children. It's just common sense stuff. So we'd already had that on there, but then they regulated what warnings we had to put on the labels and in what order. So we did that. So we pulled everything off the shelf, relabeled it, and rebottled it, and put it back up. And then they changed it again to another format. And so we did it again. And then they designated that we couldn't put a name that indicated what the flavor was. Can't be any indication as to what's in the juice so that it's not enticing to children. So we pulled it and we redid it, put it back up there. Then they decided that we couldn't have any characters on there. And now I wouldn't say that the character that we had on ours was child friendly, but it still had to go. So again, we pulled it down and redid it. And then along came Evoli, or actually maybe that was first, but Evoli came, and then so at that point, the report was that it was our products that were causing a problem, and of course it it had nothing to do with the products that we carried, not even in our country, not really anyway. So, there was no getting anywhere with our line at that point. Then we had to create, actually this was earlier on, but we had already had a clean room that we were preparing it in, but then they created the standards for the lab. So we spent thousands of dollars building an ISO 9000 lab. And then, then COVID, and now the flavor ban. And so, yeah, I do own Refined Liquid Labs, but we put it on a shelf now because it's just, if the dust ever settles, we'll take another shot at it. But yeah, restrictions destroyed us.
Now that sounds like a lot of regulation, enforcement, and harassment for a legal product.
Yeah, exactly. It was, we made it as responsibly as we could, even when we didn't have government guidance. Well, actually, what's funny is like I said, we used to put allergy warnings on it because one of our employees had an issue with, I think it was lemon in one of the juices. And it was just a little red irritation. So we put allergy warnings on it. But now we're not allowed to put the ingredients on the bottle. So where every other product on the market warns of allergies, we can't even tell you what's in it. So if you do have an allergy issue, we're not allowed to tell you. That's just crazy.
Now, why is that?
Because they designate specifically what's on there, and that is not one of the things. And the flavors are apparently appealing to children. That's why we can only do tobacco and menthol, which is funny because all the people who started smoking when they were really young started with tobacco flavor. So it's obviously not a deterrent. But in any case, we can't put on the bottles that it's got, fruit in it or candies in it or, anything that's appealing to children. They can do it with alcohol. They can do it with weed products. But apparently when you relate it to vaping, it becomes appealing to underage people. So yeah, that flies in the face of all the other product regulations where you're required to put those warnings on the labels. We're actually being required not to.
Now, Jason, it's not just what you've described. There's also the issue around, say, nicotine concentration. They cap that. How big of an impact did that have on your business?
Well, we were warning our customers long before it came into effect as best we could anyway. So the upset was minimized by that. However, it was still an issue. There were still people who were quite angry. There were some people who were, they were on 50 nic, and the adjustment straight down to 20 nic was impactful. We still get the odd person coming in or calling and looking for 50 nic, even after all this time, which is surprising because it's been gone for a while now. So that leads to the idea that somebody is still offering it. Now, we've had a few customers come in with bottles of 50 nic that they bought somewhere else, and as soon as we ask them where, they clam right up. But sometimes it's a sketchy bottle that's clearly being made in someone's, bathtub kind of situation. And sometimes they're professional-looking labels, but not of a brand I've ever seen. So it's still out there, and somebody's still doing it. So I guess you can say that the regulations have already created a black market, and that's a little scary.
Now, you mentioned that you've got a reputation a bit of as a stickler. I guess that is one of the big issues is people coming in and asking for the 50 nic and you not participating in that sale. But from what you've told me in our pre-interview, there definitely are vape shops around that are selling it.
Yeah. I've heard from other vape shop owners that there are stores in their area that have been, selling it out the back door, that sort of thing. So it's definitely going on. I don't know if there were vape shops, but definitely convenience stores and gas stations and some little hut setups, things like that. So yeah, it's still going on. There's still underage people being sold to in different establishments. I live in my business is in a unique area. I have pretty good relationship with all my competitors, and I've seen most of them at rallies and advocating in some form or another. So at least from the vape shops in my area, I don't think that it's coming from them. I would be pretty shocked if it was. Now, that being said, I've seen some convenience stores and gas stations with some sketchy setups. But again, I don't know if that's where it's coming from. I've heard rumors, but nothing that I could put my finger on anyways. And I mean, we do have enforcement agents. They have been fairly active in our area. They've been to our store a few times and, no issue. So compared to some areas, they may be more active, but they're they're out there. They do visit us. I do know them by name, and it could be just that it's our area.
So are the enforcement officers, do the regulations that are in place, are they able to prevent sales like this?
I would think so. Based on the report, clearly they're doing investigations at all the different places. It's going to be hard if somebody is making this on the black market and putting it out there. But, I would think that they could question high school kids that they catch with it. I mean, if they can do drug investigations, surely they could do an investigation into the source of unregulated e-liquid. They have their methods. I don't know how they do their job, but I'm sure there's ways.
So you mentioned briefly, you kind of just slid over it a little bit, I think, and that is, are there shops selling to teens? Now, maybe not just shops, maybe it's C-stores, maybe it's black market, but are teens still getting access to these products?
Yeah, oh, definitely. I know they are. I have 3 sons of my own, and they've reported to me that, they've heard somebody, that has got 50 Nick and definitely people in their schools are still vaping. Although they do report that it's much less than it ever was. So that's a good sign, I guess. But it's definitely out there. There's bad actors. I wouldn't say that it's necessarily coming from one place or another. I think in our industry, we have people that are probably not following the regulations because they can see the profitability in breaking the rules. Even if they are fined, they're still made more money, selling prohibited products. So there's bad actors all over the place. I would think that the vast majority in our industry are following, because you'll lose your specialty license designation. There's a lot on the line if we do that. And it's interesting because we have, it's questionable why I would even mention this, because it's going to put a target on our industry if I talk about it. But I think what we're looking for is fair enforcement. So if suddenly there's an influx of convictions in the vape industry, then that would come off as targeted. But it would be nice to see them investigating all the potential threats. So hookah lounges and weed shops and vape shops and gas stations and convenience stores and all the people who potentially sell these products.
Now, Jason, you recently sent into RegWatch a detailed document outlining retail tobacco enforcement convictions across 34 health units in Ontario that have publicly reported since 2018. What did you learn when you did this research?
Let me read it to you. So on most of their websites, it says this district health unit is required to publicly disclose and report each tobacco sales-related conviction of a tobacco retailer, and vapor product sales-related convictions of vapor product retailers or vendors in the health unit's area within 2 weeks of conviction. So a few of the sites have that on there, and that's from the SFOA 2017, the Smoke-Free Ontario Act. So I'm on the board of the CVA. I oversee Ontario and new membership. So I wanted to do some research and make sure I knew what I was talking about. Now, I didn't need to really research the regulations. I kind of live those. So I wanted to see how those regulations were affecting Ontario. So in doing some research, so there's 34 health units that make up Ontario. If you go to their websites, you can look up the tobacco infractions as they are required to post them. And what I found was in the past 5 years, so from 2018, there was 478 convictions that had been reported for serving to minors. And of those 478 convictions, only 25 were specialty licensed vape stores. And with some of those being repeat offenders, that means that only 17 vape companies make up that number, which is actually, so of all the convictions, only 5% were committed by our industry. And that was quite surprising, because I remember watching an interview from somebody representing the Convenience Store Association, and they said that we had failed miserably in upholding the regulations. This evidence would suggest that that's not the case at all. We've actually held a pretty good record. And so now some of those sites, so like some of those websites didn't have a spot at all for tobacco infractions. Some had tobacco infractions, but nothing else. Some hadn't reported in months, some hadn't reported in years. But of the ones that did, that's what I found, was 478 infractions, but only 17 were vape companies. So I'm pretty proud of that. That certainly paints a picture that we are the best avenue for preventing youth access to these products.
That the specialty vape shops in Ontario are not getting many convictions.
No. We've clearly done a pretty good job of enforcing it, and it's like I said, it makes sense. Our license, our business is on the line. That's not something we're going to mess around with.
So, but knowing the fact that, as you said, that some teens are still getting these products, who's responsible then for doing that? I mean, are there legitimate businesses that are, breaking the rules?
Well, it would seem that there are. I don't know how many or how frequent that is. And it's like I suggested earlier, some parents are buying it for their kids. It's just, I don't agree with it, but I don't know. I'm not sure we can regulate the hell out of it. We're still not going to be able to stop that. So that's why I say I don't think we'll ever completely beat it. But if the only place to get it is a vape shop and we're not letting them in, that's the closest we're going to get. And it's only a matter of time before we figure out who the parents are that are buying for their children and put a stop to it. So, like I say, if you've got it, down to one possible business that it can come from, that's the closest we're ever going to get to keep getting it out of the hands of children.
Now, based on your research here, and I know we're looking just at Ontario, but being, like you said, one of the largest markets or the largest market, is there enough enforcement going on, or could there be more?
There definitely seems to be a need for more enforcement. Some of those sites that I had researched, they showed health code violations for restaurants and things like that. Senior citizens' homes that had been investigated. Some of them showed tobacco enforcement at convenience stores and gas stations. So the officers are out there. Like I said, they visited us a few times. So enforcement officers are out there and doing it. But I mean, if the issue is that they don't have enough to investigate everybody that they're supposed to, because at this point it seems kind of like political grandstanding. The people squawk enough that they want something done about vaping, so they say, okay, well, we'll make regulations, and that'll shut them up for a while. And then they start squawking again, so they make more regulations. Meanwhile, nobody's actually enforcing these regulations. So what's the point? It's just, political grandstanding. So I think if you're going to keep making regulations, we need to see the data of how that is affecting it and whether or not it's improving it. Because I know that where they've got flavor bans, let's look at the data there, because the smoking rate has gone up, and that seems to be the opposite of what we're shooting for here.
Now, do you think then Health Canada has given enough time to let certain things that they've implemented to come to effect, and then actually research it and test it and so forth, or as you just said, they just keep piling on the restrictions.
Yeah, it's one right after the other. I mean, even as we stand right now, we're looking at we're been threatened with a flavor ban for the longest time now, and then they throw excise tax in there. So even, you know, it's before one is even dealt with, they're throwing another one on top, and that's not uncommon. That's been the way all the way through this. Before one even lands, they're working on the next one, and I mean, it seems as though they're trying to decimate our industry, and yet, you know, you go to their website and it acknowledges that this is a healthier choice for smokers. So, you know, their objective is unclear and certainly unfair.
Now, if you do have competitors out there that are not following the rules and selling these products, do they enjoy a special competitive advantage, do you think, in terms of competing against your business?
I would certainly think so. I mean, like I say, when you come to our place, they're pretty, there's a pretty good chance that we're going to give them a hard time if they're not of age. We're certainly not going to carry any of the stuff they're looking for. And as I said, that's I think the case with most vape shops. But if there is a shop out there that's got a reputation for not really following the regulations, are less likely to card you when you come in, that becomes less of a hassle. And so for people who are, you know, because not everybody's as passionate about this product, especially with a lot of customers. So they're going to go to the place that's going to give them the least amount of static, and possibly not give them a hard time about the things that shouldn't be happening either. So I would think that's going to be customers that would potentially have come to us. For those, because, you know, for those that don't care about the regulations, they just want what they want, that certainly would seem to be the more appealing place to go. You know, to that, a lot of people, it's just a commodity like any other, right? So, yeah, I would think that would be a major factor. And then you've got the black market. We're obviously losing products or sales to products like that as well. So, yeah, I would say it's a factor.
So do you think regulators, public health units, and so forth have put enforcement on the back burner?
Yeah, it would seem so. I mean, and I don't even know if it's the health units specifically, because if they're not allotted more hours for their officers, or if they're not given more officers, that could certainly limit the amount of time they have to go to each establishment. So yeah, I would think that would be a factor for sure.
Are you calling for more enforcement?
Yeah, I would think so. I mean, what's the point of having regulations if they're not going to be enforced? Because if if I'm sticky about the rules, or look at it the other way, if I decided that if nobody's going to enforce it, why follow them? Then that allows me to sell to a lot more people, because I don't have to worry about it. And if my biggest fear is that I'm going to get a small fine, which amounts to very little of the money that I've made from doing these illegal activities, then that's definitely the way to go. And meanwhile, the next store down the street is following all the rules. Well, I'm going to steal a lot of his customers that way. So, yeah, I think if you're going to create regulations, then let's enforce them so that we can see if they're actually working. And if they're not working, then let's go back to the drawing board, or, let's at least enter into a conversation about what is better. It shouldn't just be about slapping more regulations on top of regulations. I'm fine with abiding by them. Many of them I completely agree with. Some of them I think are ridiculous and are going to have detrimental side effects down the road. But let's at least see if they're effective and helpful. Rather than just appeasing the Lung Association and the Cancer Society with the fact that, yes, as a politician, I have put regulations on them and that'll show them. And we don't actually see if it does, So I think I think the public needs to be better informed about these products. Health Canada has certainly failed in that regard. Because if they were better informed, there would be less hysteria over them, and with less hysteria, there wouldn't be required to keep throwing regulations at us. So yeah, I think that's a good way to go.
Now, should more responsibility be put actually onto the teens that are using these products?
Well, I guess so. I think you're good luck with that. I mean, holding teenagers responsible for their actions does not seem to be, um, a direction that a government is going to take a stand on. I don't think. Yes, it obviously should be up to the parents to keep their kids away. It should be up to these teenagers to use common sense and not come use our products. But that's just teenagers. They're always going to get into risky behavior. The novelty does seem to have worn off compared to what it used to be. So I think that contributes to why we're seeing less attempts at it and less people vaping, less teenagers vaping.
Campaigners say vape shops are the problem. It's easier to make new regulations to shut them up, as you said, and then make them go away. But those campaigners, public health, the body part orgs and stuff, they don't go away at all.
I can tell you, and we're not allowed. So here's another rule that we're not allowed to endorse anything to do with vaping. We're not allowed to speak highly of it. Well, this isn't an endorsement, but it is my story. Before I started vaping, I was diagnosed with COPD. Last year, for an unrelated reason, I had to get a lung X-ray done. And I mentioned to them that I'd been smoking and what's that look like, and they couldn't believe that I'd ever been smoking. There's no COPD anymore. So, you've got the Lung Association coming after us. We've got heart and stroke. People who vape, I mean, there's studies that show that people who vape have a much lower account of heart and stroke issues. So why they're coming after us, that's definitely, something that it is up for question. I don't understand. Like, I understand that they're similar, and I get that where there's smoke, there's fire, but where there's vapor, there isn't. Actually, that's pretty good. So I have to assume that it comes from the fact that they look the same, but that's really where the comparison ends, other than nicotine. And even nicotine, like there's a whole ton of chemicals that are in cigarettes designed to keep you addicted. We don't have any of that in vaping. With vaping, I sort of accidentally quit on 24 milligram. And, after a week or so, I dropped down to a 12. And then after a couple of months, down to a 6 and down to 3. Like, that doesn't happen with smoking. It's you start smoking, you get addicted, you stay addicted. So there's definite differences that need to be acknowledged, and hopefully that will change the way people look at it. And I think if the government did their job and actually educated people, rather than trying to dissuade people with horror stories, let's start telling people the facts. The science. Let's just follow the science. We're not asking them to take a risk or take a leap of faith. It's the proof is there. The science. There's ever evolving science every day. So let's start looking at that instead of scaring people.
And I think it's important to recognize that Health Canada spent years evaluating the safety or the potential risks around vaping and still participated in the legalization of the product in 2018. These questions have been answered by the health regulator long ago, and that's why it's legal.
Absolutely. Yeah. They wouldn't be putting on their website that it's a healthier choice if the science didn't tell them that. And I mean, I picture them being backed into a corner and having to acknowledge it, but don't look at that because they have a different agenda.
Jason, let me ask you one last question here, and it's in regard to the deal that was made when they legalized vaping. They came in, brought a framework, asked the industry to do lots of different things in order to ensure that the product was safe, and then that regulatory framework lasted only about 6 months, and then it's been collapsing under the weight of hysteria and a moral panic. Is that fair? Has the regulator broken some kind of a deal that tacitly exists between government and the industries that it regulates?
Well, I think it's pretty obvious that there is a backdoor deal going on, and that's, I mean, we can acknowledge it or not. It's yeah, there's something funny going on because the evidence is there. I mean, here's what I would say to anybody who is sitting on the fence, not sure where to go. Call your local hospital, call your morgue. Ask them how many victims of vaping they have. Call your psych wards, call the Cancer Society, call the Heart and Lung. Ask them how many victims of vaping they have. And that's really all you need to know, because outside of that, vaping is never going anywhere. It can't, it's impossible. Now, will we lose our businesses and while they get that figured out? I mean, that's possible, but I'm staying in this fight until the day comes where this is actually endorsed and embraced. And that's my goal. So yeah, I don't really know what's going on in the background. It's certainly not that they have found some damning evidence, because if they did, I would shut my shops down yesterday and move on. The last thing I want is to have thousands of customers and be, getting them set up with something that's gonna harm them. That I couldn't sleep at night if that was really a thing. So I think if they had some damning evidence, then this wouldn't even be a discussion. They would just shut us down. And that's what they threatened, a flavor ban, but that would completely decimate us. And I don't know where they want to be, somewhere in between there. They want us to exist, but I think the excise tax is your answer to that question, because once there's an excise, an excise tax, we don't have a sin tax in Canada. We have an excise tax instead. Excise tax is very rare. They almost never, how many products on the market actually have an excise tax? So this is their way of getting paid for our product, because they know that it's happening. You can't beat them, join them situation. So this way they're going to get paid. And it's ridiculous, because if somewhere down the road we are able to finally convince the masses that this is the great product that it is, that sin tax will always be there. And it's a tax for having a sinful product, even though the product is actually the solution to the sin. So it's definitely a broken system in so many ways. There's people, customers, they'll come to me and say, this doesn't make any sense. And I said, this is the issue. Stop using logic to understand this, because you'll drive yourself crazy. There's no logic.